Basically, I was asked recently to do a short 2-day study looking at governance issues in natural resource management, and these are some of the themes that emerged. So today I'll be talking about these issues.
Oh, no.
Did I go well? There you go. Resource curse, complexity and multi-level governance, decentralisation, local governance, trade, transparency and wider governance reform, and some studies on sustainable and inclusive growth. I'll be skipping some of these and focusing on certain issues more than others. I think we're all quite aware of the background of related to the resource curse, so I won't dwell too much on this, but I think some of the lessons learned from the work on there would be quite useful and transferable to what we're working on today. And that is firstly to not to assume a deterministic relationship between natural resource abundance and negative development outcomes. So natural resources don't necessarily mean bad things. And there have been many suggestions on the resource curse: economic policy changes, political and social changes, bypassing the state, privatising natural resource sectors, and taking action at the international level. And one of the key suggestions from this work is that many suggestions aren't politically feasible. So this ties in with a sort of political economy approach and to take politics as a sort of starting point. Suggestions from this study are that we should focus on change at the international level, in particular helping poor countries cope with commodity price instability. Right, complexity and multi-level governance. So this really draws in from the sort of natural sciences, which are sort of biology, ecology, sociology, geography, and so it's important to, I think that the message is it's important to bring in that level of complexity that is present in the natural sciences into governance relating to the natural sciences, and that are these operate under uncertainty, unpredictability, and information deficit. That in general, past behaviour is not really a predictor of future behaviour, and in these systems there can be rapid, fundamental, and possibly detrimental change. So generally in dealing with that, the emphasis from the literature seems to suggest to incorporate a complex system perspective, which I'll explain in a second, and to be both flexible and stable. Contradictory aims. The suggestion is that flexibility is needed to adapt to new and unexpected circumstances, and at the same time stability is important to ensure that governance systems retain their ability to regulate behaviour. So balancing these competing objectives is what's suggested. When talking about complexity, I read a blog article from Duncan Green on Monday talking about complexity, and his point was that it's important to make complexity sound better. That though geeks like the word, it's toxic for real people. And so I think a better term and more sort of approachable term is adaptive governance systems. So ones that respond to changes in the environment. The outline for this, defined by Folk's report, was for self-organising social networks. So these are made up of team and actors groups. That these actors draw on various knowledge and experiences and produce creative cooperative management efforts. Now applying this to what we were discussing today, when you talk about the nexus, we're talking about different levels, multiple levels. So I think the idea of self-organising social networks is to allow or facilitate these networks to organise and to respond to these challenges. And in the same aspect, responding to conflict, these cooperative management efforts should ideally be aimed to address conflict. There was a recent piece of work relating to water. It's called GovernAt. I think it will be relating to water and biodiversity resources in Europe, and that was a 4-year project between 2006 and 2010. I think someone probably talked more about it during the specialised water session, but it looked at water and biodiversity in Europe, and especially participatory processes and how they improve multi-level governance. So their 4-year project seemed to suggest had about 5 key messages on how to improve multi-level governance. Firstly, when approaching participatory processes, make sure you manage expectations of participants. adapt to context, interact with multiple actors, involve bottom-up initiatives, and recognise and share benefits and costs. Now, moving on to decentralisation and local governance. It's important to look at the governance of natural resources in the context of other governance reform and other governance processes, and see how these interact, in particular decentralisation and local governance. Natural resources are a source of revenue and power, and how they're managed affects the power dynamic within a country, within a locality. There are various types of local governance arrangements. These can be customary, local or traditional structures which act as local government, parallel structures, or formalisation of traditional authorities in the state system. Often these are competing for control of various resources, including natural resources. And the paper and the work shows that decentralisation can be a good space for political negotiation at a district level, whereas decentralisation as a conflict resolution mechanism there. Now, local natural resource management can have an effect on these processes. It can legitimise local authorities, it can help engage local people with local government, and promote representative, accountable and equitable processes. Now, in terms of resource availability, the evidence so far seems to be mixed. One study, which was based in India, in the Rajasthan district of India, showed that there was greater biomass availability in the commons which were governed by the village institutions, as opposed to that weren't, where degradation continued. Another study, based in Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka, as well as in India, all in India, showed that decentralisation has not significantly increased the rural poor's access to natural resources. Now, trade seems to be a relevant issue, especially as regional and international trade rules have an impact on domestic and local governance, especially of natural resources. This is more so in non-renewables, but is also true in other resources. The argument behind this paper is that natural resources have special qualities and require distinct regulation. This is outlined here, but I think this is more so for non-renewable energy, non-renewable resources. So I'll skip over this. A recent WT report suggested that export taxes, import tariffs and subsidies may be justified in certain situations, which is, I think, quite rare for a WTO report. In this case, it sort of suggested it can be used to justify volatility of commodity prices, dominance of natural resources in a domestic economy, and to shift economic rents. For example, use of import tariffs to shift rents from the exporting to the importing country, to shift rents from the extracting company to the government using export taxes, and finally export quotas to shift rents from the future to the present, or vice versa. In regard to this, there was also a stress that trade measures such as these may have unintended consequences. Transparency and wider governance. There's been a push for transparency related to non-renewable resources. What's been interesting about this is there's been evidence which has come out relating to the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. Countries where the EIT process was underway showed an improved business climate and markedly improved voice and accountability. But the links between transparency in resources and wider governance is still sort of in dispute. It could be that that transparency was more feasible in the context of wider governance reform, could be the result of wider governance reform, or it could be precipitating wider governance reform. A quick study which looked at Namibia and Kenya and the fit between natural resource management and sustainable rural livelihoods. And so there was occasional fit, but this varied from context to context. And a much more detailed study on the Philippines, and looked at factors affecting success and sustainability of local natural resource management. They identified 4 socio-political factors affecting success and sustainability, and these were clear local financial investment, enhanced local technical capacity, sound political culture conducive to natural resource management, and a supporting national mandate. So essentially these political aspects were conducive to greater success. So again, I think this ties in with a little bit of the understanding of the political situation.